We're going to let Amber get through her presentation. We're not going to interrupt. We're going to let her go ahead and speak and present to council. We will have time at the end for brief comments, but we do have 2 full days of budget retreats on October 7th and 8th. So really, this is just an opportunity to present to council and the community. Thank you.
So I'd like to start out with the fact that this, the 2020 budget proposal is online under Hot Topics on the city's website. So the electronic version is live for all the community members who would like to go to the website and see what's in the budget and proposed in detail. And we will also be having the budget retreat that will be streamed live, and it will be recorded for future reference for the community. So on September 3rd, City Council adopted 5 new goals. And the new goals are goal number 1, to address Durango's affordable and attainable housing, including options for the homeless population. Goal 2, expand Durango's unique identity as a driver of enhanced quality of life and sense of place. Goal 3, improve environmental resiliency and encourage responsible stewardship of natural resources. Goal 4, require and support effective utilization of resources to supply city services. And then goal 5 is to advance fiscal sustainability and resiliency. The detailed council goals can be viewed on the city's website at durangogov.org/council goals. This year's goals, our community will find are much more detailed in terms of the objectives that council is hoping to move forward. So the city of Durango provides a complex number of services to our community. And on this graphic, this is a little bit outdated, but I think it gives a good idea. This is from 2017. The items circled in yellow are funded through enterprise funds, and the items circled in red come from the general fund. This is important to note when we're looking at the budget, because enterprise funds have revenues within that fund that are generated that pay for the services that are provided within that fund. Whereas the general fund is supported through fines and fees, as well as predominantly sales and use tax. So this proposed budget reflects council's new goals. It is a goal-driven budget. So you will see when you look at the document that each of the council goals are identified with the icon in front of the goal for 2020 within each department and division. This overall budget includes the implementation of the compensation study. It looks at initiating an urban renewal formation, opening the library on Sunday with extended weekday hours. There are projects with the FY 2019 dedicated tax to be used for street projects and operations. There are no new taxes proposed. And the assumption has been made, although the decision has not yet moved forward at council's level, but the assumption was made that there would be the implementation of the water and sewer rate study recommendations. And there are also the capital improvement projects called out within the budget. So that's the high-level overview of what's included. When we look at all of our operating fund expenditures, you can ask yourself, where does it go? Where's the money spent? So within the budget, 55% is in the general fund, 12% is in the sewer fund, 7% is in the water fund, and 13% is within the internal service funds. Fund balance is also something that I know is very important to the community, staff, and council. So we wanted to review what we have in fund balance. So our fund balance is required to have 3% of TABOR in the reserve, which is approximately $1.5 million. Council has a policy to have between 15 and 20% set aside in a rainy day fund. So if there are emergencies or something happens, the city has enough operating reserve in that rainy day fund that we can fund between 2 and 3 months of operating expenses. After the rainy day fund and the TABOR reserve, we have what I have heard that this council referred to as an opportunity fund. So we have that remaining fund balance that could be used to take advantage of future opportunities that will help move the community and council's goals forward. At the end of 2018, we had an additional 1% in the fund balance. And by the end of 2019, we're looking at 15% in the rainy day fund, and then finishing off the year with 17% in that rainy day fund. So moving towards that 20% policy that the council currently has as a goal. When we move into 2020, you can see that we will be increasing or adding to the fund balance at the end of 19 rolling into 2020. So that is this number up here. So that will be rolling into the fund balance from the end of 19 into 2020. So this is our projected fund balance beginning of 2020. We're looking at the end of 2020 to have a projected fund balance of $9.1 million. We are focusing on, in this budget, looking at fiscal sustainability. So with the operations and projects that are proposed in this budget, our goal is to have a 25% fund balance by 2025. And what's proposed in this budget is attainable to have that 25% fund balance by 2025. So that's our 5-year look ahead for fund balance. When we look at our general fund revenues, 66% of the revenue in the general fund comes from taxes and assessments, whereas 10% is from charges for services, and then 16% is miscellaneous, and I should explain a little bit about what's in miscellaneous because it does make up 16% of those revenues. So in miscellaneous, we have our leases for the cell phone towers and buildings. We have interfund transfers. The largest portion of that is the administrative fee that the enterprise funds pay, and that's $2.5 million of that 16% there. The recreational program fees as well as rec center fees are also included in that 16%. And then we can go and move into the 6% of intergovernmental revenues. We probably will have community members that ask us what that is, and that's really the HUTF, so the Highway User Trust Fund allocation, federal and state grants, and then the 911 user fees. So we have user agencies for our 911 communication center, and the fees for the user agencies are included in that portion of our revenues. When we look at the projections for sales and use tax revenue in the general fund, we are looking at this graph here. So you can see that over the past few years, we do have a conservative estimate on on projected revenue increases. And with this here, the striped line that's a little bit darker on 2019 is what we are projecting to bring in for the remaining part of the year in sales tax, and then the little yellow hash mark at the top, if you can see that here, is what we're expecting bringing in for projected revenues for the remaining part of the year. And then in 2020, you can see that that's all projected. When we move forward towards capital improvement expenditures in the general fund, we do have a new revenue source in 2020. So in 2019, we have the 2019 dedicated sales tax that was passed that came into effect in July. So July 1, our sales tax rate increased by 0.5 cent. And we are including that in these projects so that there's an understanding of apples to apples. Once we move forward about 5 years out, we'll be able to separate those projects that are paid for from the 2019 dedicated tax out of the general fund CIP expenditures, because then we'll have similar trends that we can look at. If you look at 2015 and 16 and 17, we had a decent amount of funding that was going towards street projects as well as other capital infrastructure and capital improvement projects like network security, network storage, stormwater master plans. That's what's included in these items. In 2019, as you know, we had 0 capital improvement projects in the general fund. And as we look to 2020, we have $2 million in projects. I could be off a little bit. You can look at this. We have a little over $2 million in projects for streets. That includes Thomas Avenue, as well as street reconstructions, crack sealing, overlays, and bringing up ADA ramps to the ADA standard. And then we have $400,000, so it's $2,250,000 in that streets portion. And then we have $400,000 in capital improvement projects in the general fund, and those include Stormwater Master Plan Phase 3, GIS planimetric feature updates, public art match, Grandview Access Control Plan, which is a project that we are combining with CDOT and La Plata County for an access control plan out on the highway in Grandview area. And that is what is in there. So when we look at the general fund in terms of highlights, and the slides moving forward, just to let you know, will be the same slide for each of the funds so that we have consistency. So in terms of the revenues, total revenue increase in the general fund revenues is 8.3%. That's $3.4 million approximately. We have a 3% sales tax growth over 2019 adopted budget and 1.8% over the 2019 forecast. When we're looking at charges for services, there were increases to the fees and program fees at the rec center, so that is also included in this 4.2% increase in charges for services. And then we're transferring from the 2019 tax for operations, which is that crack ceiling, overlays, street maintenance for there. In the general fund expenditures, there's an increase of 10.2% in the expenditures, the implementation of the compensation study, and then the library open on Sundays and including those extended weekday hours. There are 8 new positions proposed in the budget in the general fund. This includes 5 positions for the library to allow to be open on Sundays and those extended hours. It includes a new head lifeguard at the rec center. This is a key item for safety of the users in the aquatics facility. That is also covered with that cost recovery as well, so it's not a direct 100% impact to the general fund. We have a communications manager that is proposed, and this meets Council Goal 5E, the increased communication item. And then we also have an administrative analyst in the finance department. In terms of the water enterprise fund, for revenues, you see a total increase of 4.1%. We are making the assumption that the residential and commercial rate increase will be based off of the rate study at 2%. And then there's the out-of-city differential that will be applied at 1.15%. Operating expenses are decreasing by 47.5%, down to $5.6 million. This is a huge decrease because in 2019, there were expenditures in this budget that were put forth for the administration building that we are not putting in this year's budget. The staffing has the compensation study implementation, and then there's $1.2 million of new capital improvement projects in this fund. The sewer fund highlights. The total revenue increase is 2%. The residential and commercial rate increase, we're looking at a 3% increase as the assumption, and then reducing that out-of-city differential from 2 to 1.15. The proposed operating expenses are a decrease of 16.7%. Again, implementation of the compensation study, and there are $2.65 million in capital improvement projects budgeted in the proposal for 2020. Moving on to the Airport Enterprise Fund, the total revenues in this fund are increasing by 17.8%. This is due to increased fees and charges per the schedule that was recently adopted by the Airport Commission and approved by the FAA. The parking revenues from on-site parking, it has increased throughout the year, and the projected increase here is 8.5%. Operating expenses for the airport fund are an increase of 17.7% with that implementation of the compensation study. And then the capital projects for the airport, we have a couple of different items here. There's a transfer to the capital projects fund for about $170,000 to address several small projects on airport property that is available in the fund balance. Again, as an enterprise fund, it has to operate within itself. And then an additional $2.5 million in capital projects that are funded through the FAA grants, passenger facility charges, and CFCs. When we move to the Sustainable Services Enterprise Fund, which is trash recycling and sustainability programs, the total revenues are increasing at 6%. There's a 3% rate increase proposed for residential and commercial solid waste and recycling fees with no change to the sustainability fee. Operating expenses in this fund are decreasing by 1.1%. The compensation study is implemented, and there's a $50,000 transfer to capital projects fund for sustainability projects. For the Transportation Services Enterprise Fund, which is parking, transit, and multimodal, we are looking at a revenue decrease of 8.1%. This is due to the decreasing federal grant revenues. We are on the step-down program for the reallocation of grant funding that CDOT's policy change shifted. So we're in the third year of that program. Parking revenues are remaining stable, and parking continues to support transit. The operating expenses in this fund are decreasing 3.5%, and the fund continues to struggle to be fiscally sustainable, and we are continuing to seek additional funding and find ways to increase efficiencies so that we can be sustainable. The compensation study is also implemented in this fund, and there's a $150,000 transfer to capital projects here for parking meter upgrades. So when we're looking at the next steps, we will be moving into our all-day city council budget workshop on Monday and Tuesday of next week, October 7th and 8th, where we will have the opportunity to dig into the fine details, answer questions, and move forward with this budget process. On October 15th, there's a joint City Council Board of County Commissioners study session related to the joint sales tax, and that's where council will see the presentations for the library and the airport, and then discuss the rest of the joint sales tax. You'll also be able to watch the county's presentation on the senior center's budget. And then finally, there's a study session on October 22nd. This city council study session will be where we look at community support funding. The business improvement district will be here. Tim Walsworth will present bids budget for 2020. There we will have a brief discussion on the contracted services reports that you'll be receiving in the next couple of weeks from our contracted service providers on that day. Then we'll have a public hearing on the budget here in this room on the council meeting on the 5th. Followed up with November 12th, City Council study session, budget reconciliation. And for all of the public out there wondering what that might be, that is where we go line item by line item, and any changes that are made from the city manager's proposed budget to the final budget that will be moving towards adoption will be clearly and transparently delineated in that meeting, one at a time. And then we are looking for budget adoption on December 5th. And that is my presentation for this evening.
Thank you very much. Comments, quick questions from council? Okay.
All right. Some points of clarification, Amber. Going back to any anticipated cuts in transit routes as part of the transit, is that in the budget at all, or are we staying, is your proposed budget staying in the status quo right now?
That is a great question, Councilor Bettine. We are staying with the current routes. I will say that we are also looking at, with that joint sales tax piece, the request from the county and direction from council looking at what we could possibly do to provide transit service out to the location at Purple Cliffs. What that would look like, that would be an increase to what's in the proposed budget. But as it stands now, 30-minute headways, 7 days a week on the existing routes.
Great, thank you. Additionally, just a point of clarification on the airport fees and charges. My understanding is those are charges that the airlines are bearing, not those charges aren't going to the individual travelers. Is that correct?
The airport will apply them. So when you have a passenger facility charge, if you look at your airline ticket, you'll have both PFCs and CFCs. Those are billed by the airport. It's an agreement between the airport and the airline and basically the provider. And those monies are given back to the airport where they are collected. So it's collected by the airport and then by the airlines and remit to the airport.
I just didn't want anybody watching thinking that we were increasing their departure fees or anything.
We are not, and we still remain at the lower end of those fees.
Great, thank you. And then the administrative analyst position in the finance department, is that to replace a position that we lost this year, or is that a new position?
No, that is a new position. The finance department is one of the few, very few, that do not have an administrative assistant. And so when looking at the needs of the departments to be able to do the work that needs to get done, the request has been made for an administrative analyst that places that position in the right area with the right skill set that will be able to help in the workflow within the finance department.
Okay, and then just briefly, you're forecasting 3% sales tax growth. I know we've forecasted pretty much flat growth over the last couple of years. What would you say, just in general, the justification for the increased forecast is?
We are looking at trends, and I may have Julie come up and do a little bit more explanation if she would like to, but we're looking at an increase of 1.8 over the forecast for 2019. We have seen a good increase in 2019 when we're looking at what we had projected after our revenues came in for 2018. Again, we did have the 416 fire, so that made an impact, but we are looking at a solid growth. And Julie, if you want to touch on that.
So I'll touch on it a little bit. So when we go from budget to budget, it looks like a larger number, but if you go from what we're actually bringing in right now, what we're forecasting for 2019, it's only at that 1.8% over, so still pretty conservative. Our budgets the last couple of years have been low because the economy's we had a new president in 2000, whatever year that was, the economy was in flux. Then we had the 416 fire, so we were really conservative the last couple of years. This number's still really conservative, being just 1.8 over what we're collecting right now. We're right now currently about 3.3% over the budget currently. So I think it's still a pretty conservative number. We'll get into much more detail next week on
So
what
really it factors in the new dedicated sales taxes.
that doesn't have any factor.
No
in that.
factor?
No factor.
So, I'm sorry, did I misread it at 3%? I thought for sure this
No,
said.
it is, it's 3% sales tax for us from adopted budget to proposed budget.
Okay.
But that does not include the increase because of the new tax. That new tax for this first year, we're going to keep that separate so that we can look at apples to apples instead of apples to oranges.
Okay, I apologize, but
does that make sense?
yeah, I apologize. I'm probably not understanding, but you're saying it's only 1.8% and then it says 3%. What's the difference between those two?
So the 3% is 2019 adopted to 2020 proposed.
Okay.
The 1.8 is 2019 forecast versus 2020 proposed.
I follow. Thank you.
Yes, sorry, I was not clear.
Great.
That's it for me.
Other questions from council?
So as usual, I will ask, are you going to send us this PowerPoint?
Yes,
Thank you,
please.
because there's
Thank
a couple
you.
of slides I want to look at some numbers on.
Yeah.
And then the other question I had was December 5th is a Thursday?
It's got to be December 3rd.
Okay, that's what
That was a typo. I'm sorry about that.
that's okay. I just went, okay.
Yes, you are correct. And I did look at that slide and go,
Okay, great. So that's,
yes.
okay,
So December 3rd
for adopting the budget.
for adopting the
Good
budget.
catch. Tuesday, December 3rd.
Yep. Okay. And anything else, we'll wait until next Monday.
Okay.
Great.
I'm good, I'll wait till Monday.
Okay, fantastic.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.